Hello, thank you for joining us today for our little conversation. We're going to be talking about exhibits and museums and the role that World War II museums have in the preservation of history. And they are institutes that help not only preserve history, but they're the ones that are going to educate future generations about past wars, military service. And part of our conversation is what we want to do is kind of talk about some of the issues that museums face and also communities and getting their stories told. So my name is Russell. I am the exhibitions curator for the Angel Island Immigration Station. And I want to turn to our esteemed panelists and go down the line and introduce yourself. Just a quick little introduction.
Excellent. My name is Laura Fees. I'm executive director here at the USS Hornet Sea, Air, and Space Museum. Our museum, thank you, whoever wooed that one. You're standing in it right now, but we are a ship aircraft carrier that sailed from 1943 to 1970, went from World War II to the Apollo space race. I want to pass it on now.
Thank you. My name's Larry Job. I'm the president of the Flying Tiger Historical Organization.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zhou Dehuai. I'm a collector. I'm from Beijing. I have 100,000 old photo. Yeah, I read the PPT. I will show you. Thank you.
So I'm going to start off just asking a few questions of our panelists, and I want to start with Laura. So Chinese and Chinese American contributions were essential to the U.S. war effort overseas. And they can sometimes get lost in this broader story of World War II. So how do museums like the USS Hornet sort of make sure that those stories are being seen and represented properly?
So it's both complicated but simple in that it is our job to show these stories, but it's also we're researchers, so we would do research. But what we often find is this is a perfect opportunity to invite guest curators because we might know how to make the exhibits happen, but we want to give the right people the platform to tell their story in a way that we never could because we don't have that intimacy with it. So I think by having our museum be available for people to come in and give temporary exhibits, however long it lasts, it could become a permanent exhibit, but just offering them the opportunity to tell their stories. We might help walk them through it for guest experience, but ultimately it is their story that we want to highlight. So just being available to people who know their story best.
I think you touched on a very important point. Museums are very dependent on their communities, and you brought up the point of community curators, people that are specialists in a particular field. I'm curious to ask you about, communities are often where these memories are held. Those are the stories that people want to tell. No, you can. No, you're fine. Yeah. So, but in working with communities, sometimes trust is hard to build in just a short amount of time. So, how do you see museums working with the Chinese and Chinese American community to make sure that their stories are presented with care and authenticity?
Well, we can back up just a little bit. I think that there's probably a theater of war in World War II that has been almost completely ignored in both books and history and in the press, and that was the China theater, and particularly the China-Burma-India theater. We got involved with this when we were over on a tour with a tour group, and we came across an airfield in Guilin, China. And that is where the command and operations cave of General Chennault was located. Now, he was a tactical genius, and that is also one of the ways that he marshaled the very limited resources that he had in order to challenge the Japanese. General Whitehead, who was a two-star general at the time, and is a two-star general, he and I were there together. And there's a rock in front of that cave that Madame Chennault had carved on. This is the rock that General Chennault stood on to watch air combats. Now, there's a long story behind that, which I won't get into, but General Whitehead and myself, we climbed up on this rock and we looked out across the field, right in front of this command cave. The scene had not changed since 1945. The runway was still there, the revetments were still there, the bomb craters were still there, the rollers were still there, and the scene in the background is a very distinctive mountain range. And I had seen that mountain range in a PBS special when two P-40s were taking off in a documentary. And I casually commented to General Whitehead, we could see a commercial development coming down the valley. And I said to him, it's a good thing you came this year, because next year that scene will be gone forever. And he made the comment, and you know what? If we don't do something to save this cave, the history that goes it will be lost also. And that's what started our organization. And our motto is honoring the past, foundation for the future.
Thank you. I mean, you really point out an important part of a museum's work. It's not only are they presenting the history, most often they're the stewards of that history. They're the ones that are among the first line to preserve that history, make sure that it's accessible to future generations. I want to turn the question to you because you spent most of your career with like collecting and telling people stories. And you know, your focus has not always just, you've shown that war is not only about military campaigns, it's also about the stories of ordinary people and even the bonds that were shared between Chinese and American soldiers. So what lessons do you think that museums could take away from focusing on the human stories and centering that in their exhibits?
I think the image or picture is very important. And the never say old soldier never to die. Yeah. So I read it PPT. I can show you the PPT.
So Laura, while we're waiting for that to come back up, what in your experience as a museum director, like, how have you been able to engage communities to get their stories told?
Yeah, so there are both passive and active ways from the museum being from the museum's perspective. And by passive, I mean that often people we're really in a lovely position that people bring their stories to us, so we don't have to always do active outreach, although we certainly do. It's a wonderful opportunity when people bring their artifacts from their family to us. Great when they give us a little heads up, but it's always wonderful hearing the stories that come attached to that. And kind of in more active ways, we do solicit stories, family stories, things like that. Ooh, slides. So much information. Yes, social media, things like that. Events like this.
So, kind of what you're showing on the screen right now are examples of photos and objects that you've collected in your work.
Okay, it's fine. Yeah, I can use Chinese. I will quickly. Yeah. 我这次做的 PPT 的展览的主题呢，就是展览与记忆：抗战博物馆的使命与未来。那这张照片呢是1944，14 Air Force，这一个飞行员在昆明的一个寺庙里拍摄的这张照片。对，然后我是用的手工的上色 ，handmade 的 colorful， 还原的这个照片的色彩，然后我觉得，就是如果是宣传这些照片故事啊，最重要的就是一个是收藏，一个就是保存。然后照片里的是this photo is my studio in Beijing， 然后这是我近1年做的4个展览。第一个展览呢是在美国驻华大使馆，在北京，关于 Flying Tiger 的一个展览。第二个呢是在今年的4月份，是在昆明做的抗战之巅，也是中美合作的一个展览。 第3个就是今天在大黄蜂航空母舰上做的这个展览，纪念杜立特行动队。那第4个呢是上个月在香港做的一个纪念抗战胜利80周年的一个展览。那我现在一直致力于用照片和讲述照片故事的方式来推广抗战故事。这个山河在这个展览呢是今年9月15号，就在半个月之后呢，在 San Francisco Chinatown， 对，然后在这个海外抗日战争纪念馆里就即将开幕。然后上面的黑白照片是它原始的形态，彩色的照片是我用那个手工着色之后的一个形态。然后做的是抗战14年的一个过程，就是从9·18事变到七七事变，然后一直到抗战胜利。那里面肯定有这个敌后战场，有正面战场，还有侵华日军，还有援华美军，还有全民抗战等等等等一系列丰富的内容。那整个讲述是抗战14年的一个全部的经过。那当然，除了抗战14年这样一个非常宽泛的概念以外呢，我觉得除了宏大叙事之外，应该多聚焦于个人的见闻。所以我觉得未来我会做一些关于一个人或者是一个群体的一个照片故事的一种展览。像第一个像这个 Chinese American， 然后我举一个例子，这是我收藏的其中一本相册。这个人是出生在加州的一个华人，他叫张一鸣。那他是一个非常非常有钱的一个 very rich boy， 然后he born in LA， 后来在9·18事变之后呢，他舍弃了非常富贵的生活，因为在他的相册里，1920到30年代，他出门坐的都是豪车，家里有马场，在旧金山有游艇。而且1930年代最昂贵的旅行就是乘坐齐柏林飞艇，然后在美国巡游，所以他当时就是做了这样一系列非常非常有钱的事儿。那后来在9·18事变爆发之后呢，他就毅然反顾的就跟着几个美洲的华侨一块儿回到了中国，然后参加了中国空军，结果最后在1937年11月11日的时候，然后在河南阵亡。然后这是他相册里的一部分的照片。对，然后包括他相册的第一页是 My Trip to America， 还有他的一些证书等等等等。对，所以他留下200多张照片。未来如果有机会的话，能做一个展览，其实他一个人就可以做一个非常棒的一个展览。对。然后左边的这个一个纪念册是在旧金山的一个华人的音乐社团，一个 music club in San Francisco。Chinese American， 然后这是他们做的这个纪念册，纪念1947年出版的，纪念的是整个旧金山有将近1000名华侨，当时参加了美国的陆军、海军，然后他们就把照片、名字都集中在这个册子里。那第2个群体呢，就我再举一个例子，就是我收藏的一本美军将领的一本相册，齐夫斯，General Gibbs。然后他是 CBI 战区，就是中缅印战区的后勤总司令，然后他负责掌控整个的一个后勤系统。那他留下了至少3本相册，里面有300多张照片。那他的照片就非常非常丰富。然后包括左边这张照片是西北军的一个将领，叫石仁林，那时候是他的副手。然后这是他签赠他的一张签名照片。然后右边呢是他在昆明过50岁生日的时候，然后中国的几名将领送给他的一个古董花瓶。然后还有这个 Signal Corp， 他们拍的照片非常漂亮，因为他们当时属于战地摄影。那我有一个人的相册，这叫 Charles Shelley， 然后他有3大本相册，有将近800张照片，因为他是当时整个中缅印战区负责通讯兵的总负责人，所以他用职务之便收集了800张照片。然后里面的照片非常漂亮，可以看到，包括有中国的这个一些神像，还有包括中缅印通车典礼，还有美国的摄影师，还有云南的一些劳动人民的一些照片，还有包括战争的一些照片，非常丰富。其实他自己也可以做一个展览。然后摄影展的话，像这个有一个14航空队的一个摄影师， 然后这都是他拍摄的，将近300张的照片，都是在四川、云南、陕西等等等等拍了很多很多照片，非常漂亮。一些神像、寺庙等等。其实我想的是，如果这些人能给他们空间，能给场地，能为他们每一个个体用他们的私人相册做一个小型的一个 mini exhibition 这种展览，其实是一个非常棒的、非常棒的一个故事。就从一个美国人或者是一个中国人的视角，然后回顾当时那个战场的残酷。除此之外呢，在照片展览以外，还要有很多的实物的展示作为搭配。比如说这个水壶，这个水壶非常有意思，这是1918年第一次世界大战的时候，美国工厂生产的水壶。然后到了第2次世界大战的时候，一个美国的士兵带着这个水壶从加州出发，然后一直到了印度，然后从印度又随着军队打到了缅甸，最后又和中国军队一块儿回到了这个昆明。他把他一路上经过的大概10几个地方的名字全都刻在了这个水壶上。然后这个水壶现在正在云南展出，云南的那个展览一直展到9月30号，目前已经有50万人次的观看。然后这些是当时美国的官兵在中缅营战区制作的手链还有戒指，然后还有包括当时当地的中国人送给他们的一些纪念品，送给他们的一些礼物。然后这个就是包括如果未来有可能的话，制作一个展览，只做签名照片，像一些中国将领，比如最左边是很好认，孙立人将军，还有史迪威将军。然后孙立人将军右边是蔡廷锴，蔡廷锴将军右边是葛坤化，就哈佛大学历史上第一位华人教授。然后还有包括像蒋介石、林语堂、赛珍珠、宋美龄等等等等，这些人的照片如果单独做一个展览的话，也是一个很棒的故事。That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing some of your work with us. I really think, this emphasizes, where the story lies. Most people turn to museums as places that are the repositories of knowledge, but it's really the communities and the individuals, the descendants, that hold these memories and make them personal. They make them relatable. They share the emotion of the different conflicts. Larry, I'm curious to know what has been some of the most surprising collaborations you've done with communities?
Oh, that's a very broad question, and I'll try to answer it as well as possible. After we partnered with the people of Guilin to build the museum and the park, I probably read about 200 books on the Flying Tigers and the Asia Theater of War, the CBI, what have you, and a lot of information came through on that. But more importantly, I met people in China, Chinese who were fighter pilots in the 14th Army Air Force. We met CBI pilots, one gentleman in particular crossed the hump 87 times. We met CNAC pilots, which are China National Aviation Corporation. They crossed the hump and carried almost as much tonnage into China as did the 20th Air Force. Now, one of the things the military says is the fighter pilots get all the glory and the transport pilots do all the work, and that's very true. The thing I learned, and a point I'd like to make, is that the C-47s and the transport aircrafts that flew the supplies into China were far more important than the fighters and the bombers. And why is that? Because without those supplies, those fighters and bombers would have been nothing more than just good ground targets. Because once the Stillwell Road was closed, all the fuel, all the oxygen, all the bullets, all the food, everything right down to toothpicks had to be flown over the hump. That, at the time, was the most dangerous flying in the world. There were more hump pilots killed than fighter and bomber pilots combined. The other interesting fact that I learned was that the Berlin airlift was patterned after the hump flight. So there's where you have a history that came in later and benefited us. We were wanting to do something in the museum that would be different from the other museums that we had been to. And it's very common and is normal that the fighters are highlighted, the bombers are highlighted, but you rarely ever see anything about the transport pilots. So we thought, well, what if we were able to obtain a C-47 and fly it across the hump, recreate a flight, and put it in the museum? As far as we know, no C-47 had crossed the hump since World War II. We did it in 2016, and I will guarantee you it'll be the last time it'll happen. The lady most responsible for that flight was Florence Fong. Our organization is not wealthy. We had no wealthy members, but we were looking for the funds to buy the C-47 and fly it into China, and Florence stepped up. She gave us a very large donation. We were able to locate an aircraft in Australia, and we proceeded to take it to Guilin. We departed in August of 2016 on what we thought would be an 8-day trip. 96 days later, we arrived at Guilin. We had 2 engine failures en route, which meant we had to change the engines. We had a lot of other incidences along the way, things we could never have forecasted or planned. As an example, we landed in Utapao, and that night, the very long-lived and loved king of Thailand died, and the whole country went into mourning. Fortunately, that didn't impact us too bad, but it could have. But there were things along the way where the cooperation and the help of all different nationalities got us over the hump. And as I say, it took 96 days to get that airplane to Guilin. It is now sitting in the museum, and they have built a beautiful glass building around it, and it's just a beautiful display. But it tells the people who come in, hopefully, how important that airplane was to China's survival, and also starts to shine a light on the China, Burma, India pilots and the sacrifices that they made. We also have heard many stories, and our museum, and this is the way the Chinese approach it. Our museum, we consider to be the big tent. We don't compartmentalize. We don't go AVG, 14th Army Air Force, 20th Air Force, this, that, and the other thing. We include everybody in that museum, just as the Chinese do. They don't discriminate. It doesn't matter whether you were a pilot or a mechanic or an armor or a ground pounder. If you served in China in World War II, they are very thankful for what you did, and they honor you, and they collectively call you a flying tagger. So in our museum, we try to tell the history of all those people, not just the fighter pilots. So that's our contribution to history.
Yeah, Laura, it looks like you have something that resonated with you.
It did a little bit. I can't beat flying an aircraft over the hump. We haven't done that here at the Hornet Museum, but I was going to kind of ask/talk about how we actually capture the information, that memory. And in our case, our youngest sailor who served aboard Hornet was 18 in 1970, so you could do the math, and we're collecting oral histories and written histories. But what resonated with me when you spoke about going over the hump was kind of capturing that, recapturing those moments. And it reminded me of how extraordinary it is that Hornet has so many parts of it that we can still use. It's still a working collection, we call it. So we use our 2 out of our 3 aircraft elevators still today to move aircraft up and down between the flight deck and this deck. We use our bomb elevators. We use our other machines like that. Our winch system right here still works. We can get down to the 4th deck through that. So, and I think every time we do that, we live the life for a moment of how the sailors did, and just going through the same actions they did is very very captivating. It kind of connects you back to them in a way that I think few other opportunities can offer. So that was just kind of the moment that resonated with me. I'm like, we kind of do that, not exactly, but one trusts me in a pilot seat, but otherwise.
Really hard of hearing, so I'm only getting a part.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
Yeah, so I know if we had more time, we could have a longer conversation up here about the role of museums and the role of curators in kind of preserving this memory. But I want to thank you guys for being on the panel today, and I want to thank everybody for joining us in this conversation. And do you have a final thought? Sure.
I want to add just one thing. Along with this C-47 and this gorgeous glass hangar, one of the things that we asked the people that built the museum to do was to create a monument or a statue to show the cooperation and the importance between the cooperation between flying taggers and the Chinese. And what we asked for was a flying tagger, an injured flying tagger, on a stretcher, being borne by Chinese villagers, protected by the Chinese armor, being carried back to his base. And they did a beautiful job. And the statistic that I learned is that if you were a flying tagger shot down over China in World War II and you were picked up by villagers, you had a 95% chance of getting back to your base alive. And that's remarkable. That's almost a guarantee. And you have to remember that the Japanese offered a huge reward for flying taggers. And I have many stories on what the Chinese villagers suffered to protect those flying taggers, which I wish we had time for, but we don't.
I think with that, I think that's it. So thank you very much.